Hello, and welcome to episode 21 of Into the Spotlight. I'm Morley.
And I'm Ryan. Today's guest is a multi-talented painter and artist whose beautiful artwork consists of sweeping landscapes, wildlife, and the historic seaside scenes of the Gaspé coast. Her amazing imagery evokes themes of nature, memory, and the significance of home. With well over 100 paintings completed and many more on the way, she hopes to continue to represent and promote this unique region of Canada to those within the community and those who live well beyond it. We are honored to welcome Stephanie Bond to the show. Hello, Stephanie.
Hi there. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Well, thank you so very much for joining us. You're someone I thought that would be great to have on the show for a long time. I remember going to your little art sale that was going on and just outside of Barishaw last summer and seeing all of your incredible artwork. And it was just so, like, for me, for being back home, it was nice, but seeing your artwork and seeing, all these landscapes and imagery that I've seen since my childhood to be represented in such a wonderful subjective way was just great to see.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a pleasure. Usually, my paintings really bring memories of the Gaspé coast from people who are away coming back to visit in the summer. Um, so I guess you would have been one of my main targets at a market like the Barishaw market.
And I still am.
Yeah.
So I'm going to quickly act the layperson because I'm sure many people listening don't actually know where the Gaspé coast is. So could you two kind of orient the audience? Where is Gaspé?
Yes, well, Gaspé is on the tip of the Gaspé Peninsula. I'm sure a lot of people listening maybe heard of the famous Percy Rock. It's often showed into tourism guidebooks and commercials and so on. So we're at the most eastern tip of Quebec. There's also like a place, for example, called Cap Gaspé. It is a small piece of land where if you're there during the sunset or the sunrise, you're the furthest east possible that you can go on land in Quebec. Yeah, it's beautiful to live here. Everything is very open, very peaceful. It's ideal for an artist to be living here in the Gaspé.
And your artwork, Stephanie, along with many other local artists from around the town and from this region, really represent that very well. Could you tell us a little bit about your journey of like how began your artistic pursuits and how how your studies sort of played into that and how it all led up to where you are now today as an artist?
Sure. Well, when I was a child, I was one of those kids that was often very bored. So, in order to, I guess, break my boredom, I picked up a pen and I started to draw. So, I've been drawing as long as I can remember. When I was 16, I bought my first set of paints. So, I am a self taught artist, aside from going to school at Dawson College for graphic design and having one or two art courses. Later on, after a graphic diploma and living in Montreal for 10 years, I started to really miss the ocean. That's really the bottom line. 2 weeks vacation, 3 weeks vacation, eventually 5 weeks vacation. It just wasn't enough for me. I had to come back home, and I was fortunate enough to be able to come back home. I think it would be like that for a lot of you guys listening. If you were born beside the ocean, there's something about the ocean that um, makes us homesick if we're far away from it. So later on, and when I moved back here in 2008, I was still actually working a graphic design job here in the Gaspé, but I was constantly thinking about painting more. Just after working all day, 9 to 5, I was too tired to paint much. And I had a small break into this job, which gave me a chance to paint a bit more. So I realized that maybe working part time or a job which gave me more flexibility would be ideal for my lifestyle and give me a chance to paint more. So I guess I could say I'm lucky because everything kind of fell into place where I have a day job now, working as a coordinator for a local organization. And this day job gives me the chance to paint and be creative even during my work day. Still doing graphic design as a living, but I'm able to focus a lot more on my own artistic artistic dreams, I can say at this point, um, to become maybe a full time artist. Maybe eventually, maybe only when I retire from my day job, I'll see. But so far, it's going good.
That's wonderful to hear, and it's I agree totally with your point about like being growing up by the ocean, having just that memory of like when you move away. Because when I was in Montreal and Toronto, like I missed it a lot, and like I love being in the city and everything, but there's something about being by the ocean, having the sea air, the salt air kind of like impact you. It's I don't know. There's something about the ocean and the landscape just around Gaspé that inspires all types of writers and artists. There's just something special about it that's hard to put into words. I guess that's why we make art out of it.
Yeah, exactly. When I was living in Montreal, don't get me wrong, I did paint, but the paintings I did were more or less to decorate my condo. So it was a little bit different type of paintings, or maybe to paint something for a friend as a gift and so on. But yeah, the moment I came home along the Gaspé coast, for those of you who haven't been here yet, when you arrive to Rimouski is probably the first chance you get to see and smell the salt air. So um, that's the moment where I felt like I was home.
Yeah, your paintings are so evocative. I grew up in New Hampshire in the U.S., so a little ways down the coast, but not super far from Gaspé. Um, we would go up into Maine, and that's a little more of a similar landscape and topography. But your paintings are so evocative of just kind of that feeling of the coast, like the openness and the airiness of it all. And I love one of the things I really like about your work, Stephanie, is the way you show clouds and light. There's the expression in Montana, like big sky country. And that's kind of the sense I get with some of your paintings, like just like the vastness of the sky and so much texture that you can get from like various cloud formations over the ocean because you can see so far. As well as like the different seasons, because the winter time in near the ocean feels like very stark in a very beautiful way. And I'm looking at the who's watching you on your website, the painting of the owl, and I look at it and I just feel like it's beautiful, but it feels very cold, and I can kind of sense the kind of hunkering downness of winter, and that owl's just kind of perfectly suited to the climate. So it's very evocative. It's one of the things it strikes me first about your paintings.
Well, thank you. I do spend a lot of time on my skies often. Some of the paintings, perhaps the sky uh, takes over the rest of the painting, for lack of a better explanation. The owls is a personal choice. I just love owls. Like I have a lot of owl decorations in my home, and I have a lot of bird feeders outside my home. I enjoy watching birds, and so the owls and the birds come from personal interest. Although nowadays I spend more time painting the ocean scenes, especially little scenes of the coves, small beaches, and wharves that we have. Here on the Gaspé Coast, we still have a lot of fishing areas, fishing wharfs, but years ago, um, we had a lot of cod fishing industry. So I try to bring back memories for those um, more or less the baby boomer age group who grew up down on the beach with their parents splitting codfish. So often when I do sell those type of paintings, it brings back a lot of memories for people who grew up in Barishwa, but for whatever reason had to move away to the city, usually for work. So when they come and buy that painting from me of those local scenes, they're bringing back a memory of their childhood. It can be quite rewarding as an artist when you do a painting and you have somebody tell you, "Oh my God." You have no idea how much this painting means to me. This is like a memory of me and my dad on the wharf, or this is a memory of picking lupins with my dad or my mom. Um, I've had moments where people have cried when they left with some of my paintings. So as I paint more, I realize not only what people expect from me or want from me, but I realize the importance of why an artist chooses to do art, it's not always for their own personal wall. Example, my owls would be paintings maybe I would enjoy more, but it's to bring happiness to the buyer.
And you're exceptionally talented at doing that. One thing that's amazing as I look at your artwork is that is like you nail it on the head. It evokes that sense of memory. Even for me, it feels like a memory. Watch like seeing this artwork and and the way you capture these landscapes and the wildlife and the maritime history of the region so very well. Like Morley just mentioned about the big sky sort of effect, but also just the waves, the way you're able to capture the water at different times, whether it's waves or it's calm. The wharfs, just the colorful houses and barns that dot the landscape. It's amazing how you're able to do that. And just
Thank you.
yeah.
Thanks.
Well, you're very welcome. But just when you create this artwork, like where do you have, is it conscious, like, this sense of like idea of memory that you're representing? Because I know that your father was a fisherman in his time during this era. And like for people to see that, to recognize that, does that come up? Are you conscious of that as you're creating your artwork, as you're, kind of like expressing kind of like almost like moments of your childhood and sort of like representing it in that way?
It's funny because even though my father was a fisherman when he was younger, I never grew up fishing. But my grandfather was a cod fisherman as well, and I think that for me, it's when I go down to the beach in Barisha, for example, I imagine seeing 150 boats there. I like to think about the past, and I like to say to myself, "Gee, the younger generation, even myself, haven't had a chance to really experience this, and if we don't kind of document it in a way, it will be lost." So I think a part of me wants to, I guess, create memories for the buyer, but also create maybe a little bit of history documentation in my work. I'm not at the point yet where I did create any kind of books. For example, if I was to do a collection of historic artwork,
Hmm.
um, maybe someday I could do a book and show or illustrate to the younger generation what we did have here in Barishwa at one point.
Well, you should. That would be an amazing book. I would buy that day one. but but that's, yeah, it's incredible, like the way to tie all that, because Gaspé, what's so amazing about Gaspé and Berishwa and all these regions that's throughout the coast is that it's so like the memories of this past are all around us. We see it all around us, whether it's like the old wharfs or the boats or the homes. Like it's still around us, even though, like you mentioned, like the fishing industry isn't the way that it used to be. But we're still surrounded by this environment. For it to be represented in our art and to see it in this way is a good way of just preserving those memories. And that in your artwork, seeing it the way that you do is incredible.
I had one painting I did for a gentleman. He asked for a fishing scene down on Barisha Wharf. So I found usually a lot of my older scenes I do base them on black and white photos from the archives.
Huh.
Basically, a lot of people share them on Facebook. So sometimes I'll just see one and I'm like, yep, that's going to be one of my next paintings. Mind you, I have about maybe 50 or 75 in a folder. That's going to be one of my next paintings. But there's always that certain photo that catches my eye that I can envision painting it in color, mind you. And making the scene come to life a bit more, sometimes adding extra boats or adding people into the scene. So I created this painting, and at the end of the painting, luckily before I varnished it, I was asked to paint a little boy taking the cod tongues out of the cod.
Hmm.
So a lot of children back in the day, they would go down and work with their parents and do this all day long. So obviously the little boy was him himself. So um, sometimes it's just listening and paying attention to what a person is really looking for has helped me realize the type of paintings I'm doing from now on. I haven't been painting as much in the past couple months. I'll say because of COVID, perhaps we're all a little bit slow motion these days. But when I do decide to do a painting, chances are it's one I will focus on a lot more, spend a lot more time on it, and make sure that it's probably going to uh, be sold.
Hmm. Yeah. You're right about that. Everything kind of feels like in slow motion these days, and I think all artists and creators kind of feel that to various degrees. And it's funny what you mentioned about like how you sometimes find like these old archived photos. Because when I was a teenager working at the local museum, like when I was in the archives, some days like I scanned thousands and restored thousands of these old photographs using this old 1998 version of Photoshop. So maybe you might have found one of those somewhere along the line. But yeah, when you so like when you find those moments of inspiration, like you just mentioned, and then you kind of just focus on that one painting, how does that inspiration come to you? And from there, what's your creative process like?
Well, inspiration, I think, for any artist comes from your heart. So, for example, I'm planning my next painting in my mind. Uh, I've been planning it for a couple of weeks, maybe even a couple months. But uh, it could be anything. For example, we have a problem here in the world, more or less, with a lot of whales being killed by boats and plastic and so on. So there was a Facebook post about a little baby whale that had died. So it's really been kind of stuck in my head to do a painting of a mother whale and her baby.
Hmm.
So that moment for me was like, yeah, that painting has to be done. Maybe it won't be my next painting, but it's definitely in my list to do. Um, that would be a little bit out of the ordinary again for me to go back to painting wildlife, because the last maybe 10 paintings have been ocean scenes. But doesn't matter. It's again, just follow what you feel and it'll probably work out.
Yeah, I it's interesting I think you mentioned earlier that you had like 75 photos or ideas of things that you want to do. Um, and I think when I was early on in doing like creative work, I would have, two or three ideas in a notebook, and then I would pretty quickly execute on those ideas. But then as you start to get more ideas, that list builds up and you can't really do them all at the same pace as you think of them. Um, and I like that philosophy of like, you have all these ideas, and then at a certain point, like one feels right to go actually start creating, and like bringing it out of the planning stage. Is it difficult for you at all to like keep track of all these ideas for paintings you want to do, or do you write them all down somewhere, or do they all just exist in your head in various stages of planning?
I do have a desktop folder with ideas. I won't say it's difficult. I think one day I just wake up that morning and I say, today I feel like starting a painting. Um, it just kind of comes to me anytime. Usually, I have to say I paint more into the winter because we're home. Gaspé winters can be a little harsh at times, so there's also a real peacefulness about in the winter here. Like in the summer, we have a lot of people visiting. There's always somebody coming by, maybe to see a painting now and then. But in the winter, I know that there's no one coming to visit me, so I can really go into the zone and just make a mess into my painting area and not worry about having someone drop by and see my messy place.
Yeah, uh, that's a very great space to be in when you want to do work and you just know that you're not going to be interrupted. Like actually, just this morning, I was thinking about starting a project which involves a lot of epoxy, and it's going to be very messy, and I want to not go very quickly. But I was like, no, I know I'm going to have some uninterrupted time this afternoon, so I should just wait until I have that rather than do a little bit now and come back to it later. Having those long stretches of time to work can be very valuable.
Massively. And yeah, I'm kind of the same boat where I have like these like stacks of like notebooks that are filled to the rim with like various ideas for like short stories or short films, or even things I have to pursue. And it feels like once I have a stack of all these notes, like they're kind of staring back at me. It's like, hey, when are you gonna get back to us? When are we gonna get started and get finished? It's just like, wait. But it's right, like eventually, like at some point this time and the stars align for you to pursue like a certain project, and it just feels right. And if it feels right to you, and the creative flow is working, and that's just great. That's just so fulfilling, I think, as an artist. And a lot of times, like, yeah, for me, like having those like long stretches of time, like it's weird, like I either do things like very early in the morning or work very late into the night. And like if I'm editing something, it could be like 3 or 4 a.m. and it'd be totally worth it. It's just once you're in that zone, it's very hard to stop. Very hard to stop. But I love it anyway.
Yeah, exactly. When it comes from your heart, it's like you don't even realize time. I'm there have been times where friends haven't heard from me for a week, and I'm sure they're used to it by now. It's like if I'm into the zone, it's rare I'll start a painting and let it sit there for a couple weeks. I kind of obsess over it. So if I start one in a few days, I probably finish. Um, so yeah, so a lot of craft dinner during those few days.
What is, I'm curious, what is the setting that you paint in? Is it in like an enclosed studio? Is it windows? I've just painting as a practice. I have so little experience with, so I'm very curious what the process looks like and what your workspace looks like.
Well, my workspace actually is kind of three for one. I'm working in my dining room at the moment. My dining room table has become my craft art table slash office space. So I have my desk. I work from home now since COVID-19 came to town, and so I have my all my artwork in my dining room on display if anyone comes to see it. Um, so it's not a place we know we're no longer eating here. It's become my space. um I guess eventually I would maybe like to have a studio space outside the home, but because we live in a country place, there's not really anywhere I could rent a space where I could just go to paint. um Maybe eventually we could come up with a project or something to do something like that in our village.
Cool.
Yeah. And you also have a lot of experience creating art and painting with driftwood. And that's something that really struck me when I visited your shop last summer. It's just like, oh my gosh, wow, like I never saw anything quite like that before. Could you like delve a little bit more into like that side of your artistic creations?
Yeah, there's times where sitting down for 3 or 4 days creating a painting uh, doesn't come to me, so I take time to do some crafts on the weekend, something a little bit more relaxed. What become really popular over the last couple of years was painting on rustic barnwood boards. So we see this a lot in home decor magazines, the welcome signs on the porch, and so on. It just became almost a hobby for me that I enjoyed, and also a lot of friends were asking, "Oh, can you make me one of those? Can I buy one of those?" So it's become something I do for the local markets more. Bringing my actual paintings to the market is not the best idea because they're outside markets, so the sun can be really hard on the artwork.
Right.
So this is like craft material that I sell uh, during the summertime as well.
That's really cool. Is that something you always had like a passion for that you're doing, or is this something you just began fairly recently?
Well, the graphic designer in me has a little bit of interior designer as well. So I think that I tend to go towards the fads of home decor. So these signs, coffee shop signs, welcome signs, they do have a graphic feel to them. So it all kind of comes together with my artistic, I guess, knowledge of graphic design, illustration, mixed with paint.
Going off of that a little bit, I mean, do you feel like your graphic design education influences your more landscape or your the other paintings you do? You mentioned you did a couple like drawing courses, but I'm curious, like in the other more design focused courses, like how that has influenced your painting, if at all.
In order to be accepted into Dawson College at the time in 2000, year two, no, 1999. At that time, graphic design was really big. So there was a lot of people applying. It was like the course to take more or less. But for me, it was just a matter of trying to find something artistic that I could actually make a living with. So in order to be accepted, I was accepted based on my knowledge of drawing with ink and I was painting a bit at the time. So I think that it all kind of, I guess, it's like a puzzle. It all fits together in a sense. Um, yes, graphic design does influence some of my work, just based on the simplicity of some of the work that I do. I'm not really a realist painter in a sense. If I add textures into the sky, colors, patterns, maybe I don't even realize that some of those patterns could be influenced by graphics.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I mean, I would assume that having some sort of formal design education would help you develop the confidence to do things a little more simplistically. Because I think as someone with like less formal training, it might be intimidating to leave something a little simpler, or, you know, leave, something a little more stark. I feel like that's where you see experience and practice come through, is those more like bold, open works.
Yeah, it'll come easier with time as well. I think the last painting I did, the large ocean sunset scene. There is a graphic sense to that painting, using maybe 4 or 5 colors and working with those colors. In the past, perhaps I would have just used 20 colors, and I don't know, it just kind of comes together with experience. I still have a lot to learn, but I think that um, you can see how I am weeding out the good versus the bad in a sense.
So on that topic of color, you mentioned earlier how the source material for a lot of your paintings is these black and white archival photos. Um, I was curious just about what it's like deciding the colors that are going to go into those. If you go out, walk around and get inspiration that way, or how much of it just comes from your own head. What is that process like?
I think I have a love for blue and green. So I'll have a lot of blues. The ocean is blue, obviously, but I mean, I tend to work with closer, usually a bit of a closer pastel palette versus brights now. But it depends, I guess. Um, if I'm working from a colored photograph, sometimes the colors are not as much of a challenge. I'm just working from what I see more. So I really think that the success with working from the archives gives my art a bit more of a fantasy or a punch versus working from colored photographs.
Yeah, you can bring in some of those subjective elements into it, especially because back then, or even just now, like the colors from were also varied. So especially growing up on the Gaspé coast, you can bring some of that because it feels like a memory, especially in a child's memory. Things do pop up much more colorfully. So that's what, I don't know. Maybe that's just me reading into it, but it explains why I like a lot of your art, because blue and green are my favorite colors. So that goes a long way.
Yeah.
That goes a very long way.
A lot of people do enjoy my black and white pen art. I just work with a ballpoint pen,
Hmm.
and over the years, I always have, maybe I would say, one out of every 50 people that look at my art say, "I really just love your black and white simplicity." This was how I started, really. So I guess I always try to have a variety of
Hmm.
work for every person and every budget.
And black and white art it's just nice. Like I like watching black and white films. Like there's something about like just the color tones and the way, especially in art, the styles, just is so eye catching and engaging. There's something just so pleasing to look at. And it's interesting because like those sketches, they remind me of like a lot of another local Gaspé artist, Natalie Chiquin's work. She's fantastic, and she's very good at drawing and sketches and painting as well. So
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of artists in our Gaspé area. I think that even in for different reasons, we inspire each other. In the past couple of years, I feel that, um, well, I guess I'm learning the importance of what art has to do with your mental health.
mhm.
For me, it was always just a place to escape, pass a few hours on a Saturday and so on, not even realizing that while I was creating the art, I was also giving myself a chance to maybe de-stress from my work week or so on. So it's great to see all these young artists like Natalie and others coming up along the Gaspé coast. There's really a lot of interest. People nowadays are taking the time to appreciate anything handmade, hand done, more than what they were maybe 5 years ago, for example. It would be normal to go to Walmart and buy a piece of artwork to stick in on the wall for a couple years. I think now people are really looking at where they spend their money more and realizing the importance of supporting local artists.
Mm-hmm. That's the idea of like supporting local artists and fostering these communities of artists that are supportive of each other and from people who are just supporting art in general. That's something we've been discussing a lot. That's just like a good segue into like talking about the importance of community into your artwork and your own artistic style, because it captures not just only the landscape but the people of the region. And that's one thing that struck me since I came back here, was just how supportive and how tied together the artistic community in Gaspé is, and everywhere in between. One thing I find interesting is that like how you interact with the community to promote your art and to share it with others. You have your own little Facebook group. It's not like a Facebook page like other artists would do, or they just post it and that would be the end of it. You have a group and it's like you share it and there's conversation. You interact back with them and there's this nice little back and forth. What's that like? Sharing in that more connected way.
Yeah, social media obviously has helped a lot for any kind of art networking. Um, with my day job, I also do art workshops. So I have, well, before COVID, I would have groups of maybe 10, 20 people coming out at a time to learn basic painting. Um, Now, during COVID, I decided to make a YouTube page so I could keep my online videos. Basically, I have three on the YouTube page right now. Just a basic painting, so you can follow along as I paint. And I think that having things like this available, not only for people in Gaspé but anywhere, is a fun activity while we're isolated at home.
Mm-hmm. That's something I was looking at that I like to try. I'm terrified of what the end result's going to look like for me, but at least I like to try it just to see.
Yeah, it's all for fun anyway. I mean, a lot of times people come out, they're like, oh, well, I never painted before, or maybe I painted a little bit, but I don't know. But once they start going, they're really surprised what they can do. And I've noticed many times where I've visited these people perhaps in their home afterwards, and I'll see their little painting that they did hanging on their kitchen wall, or so it's something special when you create something on your own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's amazing. It must like be amazing to like, that's one thing that's great about artists, is that they can inspire and, raise everybody up to another level, and sometimes kind of like awaken a creative or artistic spark that they may not have been, conscious of before.
Yeah, myself, always been inspired by Tennyson Johnson. He was quite, I would say, almost a master artist in my mind.
Mm.
His artwork was just so humble and plain Gaspé scenes, local scenes such as two men sitting at a table having a beer playing chess, um, fishing scenes as well, and heritage homes and so on. So um, I think that it's important to inspire each other as much as possible. Um, in the end, we feed off of each other, right? So I, it's I feel that we have a really, really good community of artists here in Gaspé to work together.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is one of the great things about social media is the ability to develop these communities. And I'll mention someone later when we talk about who we're putting in the spotlight this week. But I've just found so many inspirational people who are doing work that I like could never conceive of before I just like stumbled across their page or someone recommended them to me, as well as people here in Toronto. it's kind of funny. We've somehow interviewed a lot of people in Toronto for this podcast, just because Ryan and myself just both have lives in one respect or another here. And I'm like, wow, I'm so excited to actually like hang out with everyone and go to some of these galleries and events and things. That's always, I think one of my favorite parts about going to art museums is you don't, it's very difficult to imagine art before you see it, or art that you've never conceived of before. You're like, oh, I didn't even realize someone could make color work in this way, or like a painting like this could make me feel this way. It's the level of creativity of that's just out there is amazing, and just how unique everyone is in how they make their art.
Yeah, and just how personal it all is, and the sincerity that comes from that as well, and like just how that ties into their style, and seeing, like you mentioned, people be able to work with like color and shapes and designs and just subjective visions that you could never imagine, but when you see it, it's just so, awe-inspiring.
Yeah, it's one thing right now with the situation we're in with COVID that we're lacking seeing things in real. So people
Yeah.
have told me, "Wow, like I've seen this painting on Facebook. I never realized how big it was, or how small it was, or it's so different in real. It's so uh, it's it would be nice to." Be able to show all my paintings to everyone in real, but often a lot of my sales are directly off of my Facebook page. So even myself, sometimes I'll do a painting and in a day or two it's gone.
Hmm.
I only sell originals. I don't sell any prints. So um, once it's gone, it's gone. So
Is
aside from a
that
photo,
is
yeah.
that difficult at all? Do you sometimes feel like you don't have enough time to appreciate it on your own?
No, I have no problem at all sending it off.
It's a good problem to have.
Yeah.
That's funny, but it's true though, because like even when you see it online, whether it's on Facebook or on your website, like these, especially the landscapes, they're so grand, they're so epic and majestic, and they're so striking. I mean, especially if someone lives in Gaspé who has visited Gaspé or just been somewhere similar, like it's just so, it just strikes you, and it's so immersive in a way. It's really amazing how you're able to
Yeah.
capture that.
Well, for me, I'm very proud of being a Gaspésian. I'm very proud of where I'm from. So I think when I do a scene, it just comes natural to highlight how beautiful it is to live here. I've painted probably 250 paintings so far.
Hmm.
There have been a few I haven't documented, but the majority of my artworks have numbers on the back. But I painted about 150 in the past 10 years.
Huh.
So there's a time where I was painting probably one painting per month.
That's amazing.
Now, like I said, I'm slowing down a bit, just at the moment. But going with the flow, it doesn't really matter. There's always, I guess, something special if I take my time more and create less. I think it's becoming more appreciated
Hmm.
versus somewhat mass producing in the past.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I don't know if either of you feel this way, but I've sometimes found that if I take time away from a craft, so like right now I'm learning to play the bass, like the bass guitar, and I'll have some great streaks of time where I'll spend like every like 30 minutes a day for 4 days in a row practicing. And then I'll take like 2 days off and I'll come back to it, and I like everything's a lot easier and I can be more relaxed. And I think reducing your pace in many ways allows you to do that on like a macro scale. Um, and sometimes I think like with everything, like you have these fits of productivity sometimes where, like we were mentioning earlier, you spend 4 hours, you know, a few days in a row, and then you just finish something and it's great. But a lot of time you need to kind of follow the timeline that your body wants you to follow.
That's
Yes.
that's very true. Even for me, like, because with the video work and some of the other creative work that I do now, because when I first learned how to do videos through university, it was always like a tight deadline. You have like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks to plan, shoot, and edit something. That's a very intense process, and that's if it goes well. So,
Mm.
so like even now, like now I'm starting to think, wait, I have time. I can really take time to focus and have everything lined up the way I want it to be. And so I'm still trying to break away from that sense of okay, it has to be done now. It's just like, okay, wait, I can, just take more time just to get it the way to a point where if I'm happy with it, then I think maybe others will be happy with it as well. And it has to have that sense of fulfillment, I think, tied to it at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's true. It's important never to criticize yourself too much. Everything you do is one step at a time, and it's a learning process. So I know every artist reaches a point sometimes where they're uncertain which direction to go, or they feel like they hit a brick wall and they can't create for a while.
Hmm.
It's quite normal part of the creative process for that to happen. So I really think that it's just a matter of sitting back and taking it easy for a while. It doesn't hurt anything.
That's very good. I'm gonna have to note that down.
Yeah.
But it's because you've been painting the way that you've been doing with your art and your projects for about 10 years now, right?
Yes.
So over the span of those 10 years, what's something that you've learned the most about yourself and the art that you make?
I think I've learned to just, like I just kind of mentioned, paint what paint what I love, of course, but also paint with, I guess, an imaginary client in my mind. Who is this painting going to be for? And who will this painting make happy? Because I know when people buy art, usually they don't just buy it for a month or a year and trash it afterwards. They keep it for life.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I've reached a point where I'm able to focus more and not be all over the place wondering what should I paint. When just focus one day at a time, and it'll come naturally. Don't stress about it. Just enjoy it.
Yeah, that's really great to hear because I feel like I'm more at that point now where you're kind of like, what should I do? Stressing about it a little bit, young and existential. But there's nothing that replaces just doing the work, and you have to just do a lot of work in anything to get to a point where you can be more confident and secure and independent, and sort of a little more consistent in a way, and consistent in your approach and consistent like how you think things will go. Um, yeah, it takes the reps. Got to put in the reps, as I like to say.
Yes. Well, for artists, for example, a lot of artists have to try different mediums. For myself, I've started with ink, and then I went to oil paint. Oil paint, I enjoy it very much, but have a lot of allergies, so I could only paint when in the summer when I would have a window open.
Mm.
So it's can be very toxic on your breathing. So I switched to acrylic. Acrylic doesn't have quite the blending, I guess, quality that oil does. Um, but it dries so quickly. You can erase your mistakes a lot easier. So I found that acrylic was really the paint for me. But I still have my oils and my watercolors on hand. Every now and then I'll switch up and do something different. I've never really been able to focus on an exact medium.
Hmm.
Um, but that's probably just the artist and me avoiding getting bored, maybe painting with the same type of paints every time.
Mm-hmm. It's true. It's like we say on this podcast very frequently. It's a process.
It's a
And
process.
I don't think anyone, even the most successful, prolific artists, did it in one medium exactly the same for their whole life. Like everyone changes and evolves and needs to keep it fresh in some way. Um, I mean, some people will look at an artist's career and say they were great in this period, and then things went sideways, and then everything was terrible, because most artistic people, musicians especially, right? Like how many strong opinions there are about this band was great up to 1970 and then everything went sideways, because everyone just gets bored at a certain point and wants to keep evolving and changing.
Hmm.
And that is something I really appreciate in some of my favorite artists. Is I'll really love an album that they put out, and then they come out with a new album and I listen to it. I'm like, I don't really know what I think about this, but then I'll keep listening, and then you realize, like, over time and maybe even a year later, like, this is an incredible work of art, and I just like, they were ahead of me in like what I wanted to listen to.
Right. A little ahead of the curve. And it's a process of discovery, for artists, to keep evolving in ways, because I don't think we ever want to be static. I think we want to keep, making things and trying different techniques or styles that I think, that speak to us and where we are as artists. What we see and what we do is constantly evolves over a period of time, and we change as people. And it's important for the art to reflect that as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's also one of the reasons that, like, artists and art in some ways doesn't exactly fit into like the cookie cutter mold of society, because
Nope.
a perfect functional component of society is someone who's going to do their role and be like, absolutely dependable and predictable. But like the very idea of art needs a certain amount of change and kind of a variation of energy, not like metaphysical energy, but literally like energy levels, like bouts of productivity follows by like bouts of rest, and it's not consistent, it's not predictable.
No. Even for me, like, just like I'm trying to do like, videos now that, I wouldn't have even considered or maybe had the courage to do like 3 or 4 years ago. But now it feels like the right time to do that. I guess it's from interacting with artists and just thinking like, wow, what, that's amazing. Why can't I try that? Just to explore that space.
Yep, take the time to explore and take the time. That's a lot of that's something that a lot of people nowadays rush. Just sit back and take the time that you need to make the art that makes you happy.
Yeah.
Very wise advice.
I think that's a perfect point to transition to what we're putting in the spotlight this week. And I will kick it off. So I wanted to give a shout out this week to someone I found through Instagram, through the online maker community. He's a super supportive guy in terms of just, promoting other people's work. And he makes some amazing stuff himself, which is the reason I'm promoting him. His name is Daniel Ublases. And his Instagram account is Multi Awesome Studio. So he's out of Austria. I think he's right on the border of Austria and Germany near Salzburg. And I can't remember exactly how it describes his studio, but it's like a multidisciplinary creative production studio. So they make physical and animations and graphic design and illustrations, and it's very, very creative, whimsical work. He had I was talking to him in like a big group Zoom call, and he was mentioning his like 5 seconds of fame, where he made this. I'm still unsure as to now how much of it is real and how much of it was like animation. Maybe it was all one or the other, but essentially it was like a paintbrush with a tongue on the end. I don't know if it was like a silicone tongue or something, and it was a little video of like painting with this tongue paintbrush, which is hilarious. But yeah, it kind of blew up and got like millions of views on Instagram. But he's a really great, creative, positive guy. Who, yeah, it's really fun to look at his work. It'll bring joy. Daniel Ublases at Multi Awesome Studio. And as with everything else in this episode, I will link it in the show notes.
Wonderful. Looking forward to checking that out. And how about you, Stephanie? What's your Into the Spotlight for this episode?
Well, basically for me, I just based on what you just said, you can find my artwork on YouTube, Stephanie Bond Art, or you can find it on Facebook, Stephanie Bond Art as well. But I'm not into Instagram yet, so based on what you just said, maybe I should explore other ways of social media. So
I feel like Instagram is a big place for artists right now. I think you might really enjoy it. There's some people
I've been
doing.
told. I've been told. The thing is, even just upkeeping Facebook for me, how will I find time to paint if I have so many?
That's a great point.
So I've been keeping away from it, but maybe eventually I will step into the unknown.
Okay.
Maybe. I know there would be a lot of artists and just people from beyond the Gaspé region who will love to see your artwork. So something good to keep in mind.
Thank you.
Ryan, what about you this week?
Geez, I almost forgot. So my into the spotlight for this week. This was hard. This was hard. I was considering a lot of different artists, but I thought since kind of keep the focus on Gaspé, I thought, well, we might as well continue with the theme of this episode. So, my into the spotlight is the filmmaker and author Paul Almond, a massive inspiration for me growing up. He is a filmmaker just a little further down the coast than the village of Shigawak. And he grew up in that village, and he went on to working in theater, then working for the very first television programs at the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation in the 1950s. And from there, he transitioned into a career in feature filmmaking, and he created and helped produce a lot of interesting and fascinating and amazing Canadian art films all throughout the 1960s and 70s. He somehow convinced Paramount Pictures to film his feature film Isabel here in the 1960s, which is, I don't know if any Canadian filmmaker will be able to do that again, but just an incredible person that I had the honor of being able to meet a few times in my late teens. I met him first when I was 16, when he was talking about his filmmaking career and how he was able to achieve that reality. And for me, growing up very impressionable, who wanted to be a filmmaker myself, meeting someone like him was kind of like meeting like Obi-Wan Kenobi and like the original Star Wars. It was such like an illuminating moment. And yeah, just being able to meet him a few times, and he spoke with me about like his filmmaking process and how he became a filmmaker, and just the amount of work and effort and how fulfilling it is to be a filmmaker. And just being able to speak with him was so inspirational to me as a 17-year-old, 18-year-old, because it was around 6 years ago he passed away, and it was because of him like I've decided to go on my path into media and filmmaking and pursuing this art form. So and he also had a book series called The Alfred Saga, which is like a semi-autobiographical tale about his entire family lineage in the Gaspé, starting from his first ancestor that jumped off a boat, a British warship, so he could stay in the Gaspé. And then it continues all throughout the ages. And the last book in the series that he published just before he died is called The Inheritor, which is all about Paul's life and how he went, like I mentioned, growing up in a small town in Gaspé, then working in theater, television, feature filmmaking, and then transitioning into a novelist in the last stages of his life. Just an incredible Canadian artist and a local Gaspésian artist. Someone that is very, very big influence and inspiration for me. And like we mentioned, like we talked about how local art and local artists matters, and yeah, I thought it was very important to put a spotlight on him for this episode. So check out his works wherever you can, and just keep the memory alive.
Cool. Yeah, you've mentioned before his Up series, and I haven't seen it, but it sounds. I'm curious if it was the inspiration for that movie Boyhood, where it took like 13 years to produce.
There are similarities, definite similarities, but the fact that like the 7 Up series is a documentary series, and the fact that it interviews these kids,
right? Boyhood's fictional, right?
Boyhood's fictional, yes, but it's like the similar that sort of jump in time and catching up with their lives, and I think that's probably like his biggest, probably his most notable work. So yeah, definitely check that out.
Cool.
So I guess to conclude, Stephanie, thank you so very much for joining us on this very illuminating and insightful episode. Thank you for sharing your story and your creative process with us. I know that we loved it. Others in Gaspé and well beyond Gaspé are going to love it as well. So thank you once again.
Thank you, guys.
Yes, thank you. All right. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.